They say you can't choose your family, but man, I really wish someone had told me you can't choose your neighbors either, especially the ones who think a designer tracksuit and a white Mercedes give them the divine right to dictate how you breathe on your own property. My name's Wyatt. I'm 54, a retired high-voltage electrician who spent 3 decades climbing poles in lightning storms just to make sure people could microwave their frozen dinners. And after a divorce that left me feeling like a hollowed-out tree, I just wanted some peace. I retreated to the only place that ever felt like home, my grandfather's fishing cabin on Mirror Lake, a little slice of North Carolina heaven that's been in the Miller family since 1946. It's a humble place built from cedar and sweat, smelling like old tobacco and lake mist, and it stands right in the middle of what has now become, in quote, the pinnacle, in quote, a gated community of 8-bedroom McMansions owned by people who think, in quote, roughing it, in quote, means the wine cellar is only at 55 degrees. The trouble started on a Tuesday, 6 a.m. sharp, while I was sitting on my dock watching the fog lift off the water, just me, a thermos of black coffee, and the ghost of my granddad. Suddenly, the silence is shattered by the screech of tires and the slamming of a car door, and out marches Brenda Sterling, the HOA president. Now, Brenda is 49 going on 80, with a smile that's as sharp as a razor blade and twice as cold, and she's trailing a very confused-looking deputy behind her. She didn't end oppose, to even say hello. She just started shrieking about my, end quote, dilapidated shack, end quote, being an eyesore, and how I was single-handedly tanking the property values of her $50 million neighborhood. She stood there, pointing a manicured finger at my cabin, telling the deputy I was a squatter and that my dock was an illegal hazard. And before I could even get a word in, she slapped a manila envelope on my lap containing $25,000 in, quote, architectural noncompliance fines, end quote. I just looked at her, took a slow sip of my coffee, and felt that old spark of stubbornness that Granddad used to call the, end quote, Miller pride, end quote, start to burn in my chest. I told her, end quote, Brenda, this cabin was here before your HOA was a glimmer in a developer's eye, and it'll be here long after your stucco starts peeling, end quote. But she just laughed that hollow, socialite laugh and told me I had 30 days to bulldoze it or she'd have the county do it for me. What Brenda didn't in oppose, T realize, is that 30 years as an electrician doesn't in oppose. T just teach you how to wire a house. It teaches you how to read blueprints, follow codes, and, most importantly, keep a paper trail that would make the IRS weep with envy. My grandfather, Silas Miller, was a man who didn't and oppose. T trust a handshake unless it was backed up by a notarized stamp, and he had left me a literal treasure chest of documents in an old olive green ammunition box. While Brenda was busy starting a smear campaign on the neighborhood Facebook group, calling me a, end quote, transient threat, end quote, and whispering at the country club that I was running a meth lab out of fishing shack, I was sitting in my kitchen under a dim yellow light, going through deeds from the 1940s. I found the original building permits, the environmental impact studies from the 50s, and every piece of correspondence Silas ever had with the county. The first time I fought back was small, just a little taste of what was coming. Brenda had sent a county inspector to my door, a guy named Miller, no relation, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He was looking for setbacks and structural rot, but I just handed him a folder of pristine, stamped documents showing every repair ever made. While he was there, I casually pointed across the cove to Brenda's massive lakeside deck, the one she used for her, end quote, champagne and charity, end quote, mixers. I asked him, end quote, hey, just out of curiosity, does the county allow permanent structures to extend 5 feet past the mean high water mark? End quote. The inspector's ears perked up. He pulled out his laser measure, and lo and behold, Brenda's pristine white deck was a massive environmental violation. Seeing her face when she got that $15,000 tear-down order from the state was better than any lottery win, but it only made her more dangerous. She went nuclear after that. My tools started disappearing from my porch. My tires were slashed one night, and she even tried to get the local marina to ban me from buying fuel, claiming I was, end quote, hostile to the community, end quote. I stayed quiet, I stayed patient, and I kept digging. And then, on a rainy Saturday morning, while I was crawling around in the mud under the cabin to check the insulation, I found it. Tucked behind a stone pillar was a second box, smaller, wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was the master easement agreement, from 1993, the one my grandfather signed when he sold the surrounding land to the developers who built the Pinnacle. As I read through the legalese, my hand started to shake, and it wasn't an Oppos, T from the cold. Silas was a genius. He hadn't an Oppos. T just kept his cabin. He had retained the sole and exclusive ownership of all riparian structures and submerged land rights, for the entire shoreline of Mirror Lake. In plain English, the HOA didn't an Oppos, T on the docks. The homeowners didn't an Oppos, T on the docks. Every single one of those fancy mahogany-clad boat slips that people were paying the HOA $3,000 a month for, they were mine. Or rather, they belonged to whoever owned the Miller cabin. And even better, Brenda had been collecting those dock fees for over 20 years, pocketing them for the HOA's beautification fund which mostly seemed to fund her private parties, without a single shred of legal authority. I didn't end Oppos. T called the police. I didn't end Oppos. T called Brenda. I called a lawyer named Elias Vance, a guy who looked like a shark in a three-piece suit and had a reputation for eating HOAs for breakfast. When I showed him the 1993 agreement, he actually whistled and told me, Wyatt, you're not just a neighbor anymore, you're the landlord of their lifestyles, We spent the next 2 weeks building a case that was less like a lawsuit and more like a tactical strike. I installed a 4K security system around my property, and within 48 hours, I had footage of Brenda's son spray painting trash on my siding and Brenda herself coming onto my dock at midnight to toss my Adirondack chairs into the lake. The climax happened at the annual State of the Pinnacle meeting. Brenda was standing on a stage in the community center, looking like a queen in her pearls, showing a PowerPoint presentation about how they were finally going to relocate my cabin to make room for a new community park. She had the crowd whipped into a frenzy, talk of removing the rot and protecting our legacy I waited until she asked for comment from the floor, and then I stood up, walked to the front, and laid a thick stack of binders on the podium. The room went dead silent. I looked Brenda right in those icy blue eyes and said, Brenda, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is you don't have to worry about my property values anymore. The bad news is, as of 5 minutes ago, I've revoked the usage permits for every single dock in this development. Since you've been collecting fees on property you don and Oppos, T-owned for 2 decades, my lawyer is currently filing a fraud claim with the district attorney for the $3.2 million you've illegally funneled through the HOA. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. The rest of the room started buzzing, then shouting, as I explained that their premium lakeside access was actually a courtesy of the Miller family that was now being terminated due to ongoing harassment and breach of easement. I told the crowd that I didn't Oppos. T want their money, but I did want their president's resignation, a public apology, and a legally binding conservation easement that would protect my grandfather's woods forever. By the time the meeting ended, Brenda was being cornered by her own neighbors, the same people who had been nodding along to her insults 10 minutes earlier. They realized their million-dollar homes were suddenly worth a lot less without boat access, and they turned on her like a pack of wolves. It was a total collapse of her little empire. I walked back to my cabin that night, sat on my dock with my coffee, and watched the moon reflect off the water. The HOA is under new management now. Brenda is facing a massive civil suit and a very messy divorce after her husband found out about the missing funds, and my cabin is officially a historical landmark. But here's the thing that's been eating at me. In the end, I won by using the same kind of cold, hard power Brenda used. I held a whole neighborhood's lifestyle hostage just to save my own skin. I feel like I did right by my granddad, but I look at my neighbors now, and I see the fear in their eyes when they walk past my fence, and I wonder, did I actually fix the community, or did I just become the new monster on the lake? I've got the power to take away their docks tomorrow if I feel like it, and sometimes when I'm sitting there in the dark, I wonder if having that kind of control is a good thing for anyone. What would you have done? Would you have played nice and let them bully you out of your heritage? Or would you have dropped the hammer like I did? Drop a comment and tell me if I went too far, because honestly, I'm still trying to figure out if I'm the hero of this story or just the smartest person in the room.